The moment I saw him standing at the altar with her, I felt my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. But what happened next would change everything, because sometimes the person you're pretending to love becomes the one you can't live without. My name is Eliza Bennett, and this is how I accidentally fell in love with my fake date at my ex-fiancée's wedding. 3 months earlier, I was drowning my sorrows in a glass of wine at my favorite downtown cafe when I received the invitation. Gold-embossed lettering announced the wedding of James Parker, my ex of 6 months, to Vanessa Reynolds, the woman he'd left me for after 5 years together. The wedding was set for June 15 at the Rosewood Estate, the very venue James and I had once toured together. I stared at the invitation, my fingers trembling. Why would he invite me? Was this some twisted form of closure? Or worse, pity? The thought of attending alone, facing their pitying glances, made my stomach turn. I needed someone impressive on my arm, someone who would make James question his choices. That's when I saw him, Alexander Reed, CEO of Reed Enterprises, sitting alone at a corner table, intensely focused on his laptop. I'd recognized him from business magazines and news features. Successful, gorgeous, and completely out of my league. But desperation makes fools of us all. What happened in the next 5 minutes would set in motion a chain of events I never could have predicted. I approached his table with liquid courage coursing through my veins and made the most outrageous proposition of my life. "Excuse me, Mr. Reed? I need a date to my ex's wedding, and I'm willing to pay you to be it." His piercing blue eyes looked up from his screen, one eyebrow arched in perfect confusion. "I beg your pardon? If you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments if you've ever been in an awkward situation with an ex." Alexander Reed was not what I expected. Behind the polished exterior of a 32-year-old CEO was a man with a razor-sharp wit that cut through pretense like a hot knife through butter. "Let me get this straight," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You want to hire me, a complete stranger, to pretend to be your boyfriend at your ex's wedding?" When he put it that way, it sounded ridiculous. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, this was stupid. I'll just—" "I didn't say no," he interrupted, a hint of amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'm just trying to understand why you'd approach me specifically." I tucked a strand of my long silky hair behind my ear, suddenly self-conscious. "You look successful. Important. Like someone who would make my ex regret his choices." Alexander studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I don't need your money, Ms. Bennett. Eliza Bennett. Ms. Bennett. But I am intrigued. Tell me more about this ex of yours." That cafe conversation turned into dinner, which turned into a strange arrangement. Alexander agreed to be my date, but with conditions. We needed to make it believable, which meant spending time together before the wedding. Getting to know each other. Creating a backstory. "If we're going to fool anyone," he said, "we need to know more than each other's coffee orders." What started as rehearsals for our performance became something else entirely. Alexander was nothing like the cold, calculating businessman I'd expected. Behind closed doors, he was funny, thoughtful, and carried wounds of his own. During our third practice date at his penthouse overlooking the city, I learned why he'd agreed to my bizarre proposal. "My ex-wife left me for my former business partner," he admitted, swirling amber liquid in his glass. "They're expecting their second child now." "I'm sorry," I said, genuinely surprised by his vulnerability. He shrugged, but I could see the pain behind the casual gesture. "Business is easier than relationships. In business, contracts protect you." "Is that why you made me sign an NDA before agreeing to this arrangement?" I asked. His laugh was unexpected and warm. "Partly. But mostly because I have a reputation to maintain. CEO plays boyfriend for hire isn't exactly the headline I'm aiming for." As the wedding approached, our pretend relationship began feeling less like an act. Alexander taught me to play chess in his library. I dragged him to my favorite hole-in-the-wall taco place. He called me Liz when no one else was around to hear it. I learned that his sharp humor was a shield, protecting a heart that had been broken more thoroughly than mine. I discovered that beneath his polished exterior, Alexander was a man of contradictions. He could quote Shakespeare from memory but had a secret addiction to trashy reality TV shows. He'd built a tech empire from nothing but still called his mother every Sunday without fail. And despite his wealth, his favorite possession was a battered copy of The Great Gatsby his grandfather had given him. For my part, I slowly revealed the woman behind my carefully constructed facade. A children's book illustrator with dreams of publishing my own story someday. A terrible cook who could burn water but made exceptional chocolate chip cookies from my grandmother's recipe. A woman who sang off-key to 80s power ballads when she thought no one was listening. "You're nothing like I expected," he said one evening as we shared takeout on his balcony. "What did you expect?" I asked, curious. He twirled pasta around his fork thoughtfully. "Someone more broken, I suppose. After what your ex did." I considered this. I was broken. For a while. But eventually, I realized that loving someone who doesn't choose you every day is just slow poison. Alexander's eyes met mine, something unreadable flickering in their depths. "And now?" "Now I'm just a woman trying to save face at a wedding," I said lightly, though we both knew it wasn't entirely true anymore. But there was one problem growing between us, one I couldn't ignore much longer. I was falling for a man who was only playing a part. The night before the wedding, we had our final rehearsal. Alexander had arranged a dinner at an exclusive restaurant to practice our couple routine one last time. "Tomorrow," he said, raising his glass in a toast, "we give the performance of our lives." I clinked my glass against his, trying to ignore the heaviness in my chest. "To fooling them all." His eyes held mine a moment too long. "Eliza, after tomorrow." "I know," I cut him off, not wanting to hear him say it. "Back to reality. No more pretending." Something flickered across his face, disappointment? Relief? I couldn't tell. "Right," he said finally. "Back to reality." Are you feeling the tension building? Drop a heart in the comments if you're rooting for Eliza and Alexander. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will tug at your heartstrings. The day of the wedding arrived with perfect blue skies and my stomach in knots. Alexander picked me up in his sleek black Aston Martin, looking devastatingly handsome in a tailored charcoal suit that accentuated his athletic build. His usually tousled dark hair was neatly combed, and the subtle scent of his cologne made my heart race. "You look beautiful," he said when I opened the door, his eyes taking in my pale blue dress that hugged my figure perfectly. "You clean up pretty well yourself," I replied, trying to keep my voice light despite the butterflies in my stomach. The drive to Rosewood Estate was filled with last-minute preparations. "Remember," I said, "we met at a charity gala 3 months ago. And I was immediately captivated by your intelligence and wit," he continued smoothly. "I pursued you relentlessly until you agreed to dinner. And now we're madly in love," I finished, the words catching slightly in my throat. Alexander's hand found mine across the console. "Ready for this?" I wasn't. Not by a long shot. But I nodded anyway. The ceremony was set in the estate's rose garden, white chairs arranged in neat rows facing an arch draped with flowers. We arrived just as guests were being seated. "Eliza?" A familiar voice called from behind us. I turned to see my former maid of honor, Rachel, approaching with wide eyes. "Oh my God, it is you. I wasn't sure you'd come." Her gaze shifted to Alexander, then to our linked hands, and her eyes widened further. "Rachel, this is Alexander Reed, my boyfriend," I said, the lie coming easily after weeks of practice. "Alexander, this is Rachel, an old friend." "Boyfriend?" Rachel repeated, looking between us. Wait, Alexander Reed? As in Reed Enterprises? Alexander gave her his practiced media smile. The very same. Rachel pulled me aside while Alexander graciously engaged with another guest. How did you land him? She whispered urgently. He's gorgeous and worth millions. Just lucky, I guess, I said, watching him charm an elderly couple with practiced ease. James is going to lose his mind, Rachel said with undisguised glee. He always said you were too safe and predictable. There's nothing safe about dating one of the most eligible bachelors in the city. Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. James had indeed called me predictable during our breakup, a criticism that had haunted me for months. People change, I said, more to myself than to Rachel. They certainly do, she agreed, eyeing Alexander appreciatively. And sometimes they trade up. We took our seats on the bride's side, a strategic choice on my part. I wanted James to see us clearly from the altar. As the music began and guests settled, I felt Alexander's arm slide around my shoulders, pulling me closer. You're tense, he whispered against my hair. Relax. We've got this. The bridal march began, and everyone stood. Vanessa appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant in white. I forced myself to look at James, standing at the altar. The moment our eyes met, I saw recognition, followed by shock as he registered Alexander beside me. But what surprised me most was my own reaction, or lack thereof. The pain I'd expected didn't come. Instead, I felt Alexander's steady presence beside me, his hand warm in mine, and realized something had fundamentally changed. I wasn't in love with James anymore. The ceremony proceeded, vows were exchanged, and when the minister asked if anyone objected, Alexander's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around mine. I glanced up at him, but his expression revealed nothing. At the reception, we played our parts flawlessly. Alexander charmed everyone, his hand never leaving the small of my back. We danced, we laughed, we fed each other cake. To anyone watching, we were deeply in love. James approached us during the cocktail hour, Vanessa on his arm. Eliza, he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. I'm glad you could make it. Congratulations, I replied, surprised by how sincerely I meant it. You both look happy. And you must be the new boyfriend, James said, extending his hand to Alexander. I've heard a lot about you. Alexander's smile was polite but cool as they shook hands. All good things, I hope. Of course, James replied, though his expression suggested otherwise. How did you two meet again? Before I could answer, Alexander pulled me closer. I saw her across a crowded room and knew immediately she was special. Some people are foolish enough to let treasures slip through their fingers. I'm not one of them. James's face tightened, but Vanessa pulled him away to greet other guests before he could respond. That was a bit much, I whispered once they were out of earshot. Alexander's eyes followed them across the room. Was it? I meant every word. My heart stuttered in my chest. Alexander. Dance with me, he said suddenly, leading me to the dance floor where other couples swayed to a slow song. His arms encircled my waist, and I rested my hands on his shoulders, acutely aware of how perfectly we fit together. We moved in silence for several moments, the pretense between us suddenly feeling paper-thin. Why did you really agree to this? I finally asked, the question that had been burning inside me for weeks. Alexander's steps faltered slightly. I told you. No, I interrupted. The real reason. He looked down at me, his carefully constructed facade cracking. Because when a beautiful woman asks you to pretend to be in love with her, sometimes you say yes hoping that eventually, you won't be pretending anymore. The world around us seemed to stop. What are you saying? I'm saying, he said, his voice low and intense, that somewhere between chess games and Taco Tuesday and practicing our story, I forgot we were rehearsing. This stopped being an act for me, Eliza. If your heart is racing right now, give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who believes in unexpected love. Before I could respond, the music changed, and the DJ announced it was time for the bouquet toss. Alexander released me reluctantly as Vanessa called all single women to the floor. "Go," he said with a small smile. "For appearance's sake." I joined the cluster of women, my mind reeling from Alexander's confession. Vanessa turned her back to the crowd, counted to 3, and tossed her bouquet over her shoulder. I wasn't even paying attention when something hit my chest and reflexively, I caught it. The bouquet. In my hands. The crowd cheered. Vanessa looked surprised but pleased. And when I looked for Alexander, I found him watching me with an expression that made my knees weak. But as our eyes met across the room, his phone rang. He checked it, frowned, and stepped outside to take the call. When he returned 10 minutes later, his expression had changed completely. "We need to leave," he said, his CEO mask firmly back in place. "There's an emergency at the company." "Now?" I asked, confused by his sudden shift. "Now," he confirmed, already guiding me toward the exit. We said hasty goodbyes, made appropriate excuses, and within minutes were in his car, speeding away from the estate. "What happened?" I asked once we were on the road. "Nothing," he said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "There's no emergency." "Then why?" "Because I needed to get out of there before I did something stupid," he cut me off, his voice tight. "Like tell you I'm falling in love with you in the middle of your ex's wedding reception." My breath caught. That would have been stupid. Wouldn't it? He glanced at me briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "This was supposed to be an arrangement, Eliza. A business deal. I wasn't supposed to fall for you." "And I wasn't supposed to fall for you," I admitted quietly. The car swerved slightly as his head whipped toward me. "What did you say?" "Pull over," I said. He complied, guiding the car to the shoulder of the road. The moment we stopped, I unbuckled my seatbelt and turned to face him. I said, "I wasn't supposed to fall for you either." But I did. For a man who always had a quick response, Alexander was suddenly speechless. "Eliza, if this is part of the act." I silenced him the only way I could think of, by leaning across the console and pressing my lips to his. For a heartbeat, he remained frozen, but then his hands came up to frame my face, and he was kissing me back with an intensity that left no doubt about his feelings. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. "So what happens now?" he asked. "The wedding's over. Our arrangement is technically complete." I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. "I think we need a new arrangement. One that doesn't involve pretending." "I like the sound of that," he murmured, brushing his thumb across my cheek. "Though I should warn you, I'm not easy to be with. I work too much, I'm stubborn, and according to my sister, I have the emotional intelligence of a teaspoon." I laughed. "And I'm still healing from a broken engagement, I sing off-key in the shower, and I'm pathologically incapable of keeping plants alive." "Sounds perfect," he said, and kissed me again. Our relationship wasn't without challenges. Alexander's company demanded much of his time, and my insecurities from my previous relationship occasionally surfaced. We had our first real fight 3 weeks after the wedding when he missed a dinner with my parents because of a work emergency. "You could have called," I said, pacing his living room after he finally arrived at midnight. "I was in the middle of preventing a hostile takeover," he replied, loosening his tie with a weary sigh. "Not everything revolves around your schedule, Eliza." "That's not fair," I said, hurt by his dismissal. "This isn't about my schedule. It's about respect." He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "You're right. I'm sorry. I should have called." The sincerity in his voice deflated my anger. I'm not asking you to choose between me and your company, Alexander. I'm just asking to be considered. He crossed the room and took my hands in his. You are considered. You're considered in every decision I make now. His voice softened. I've spent years building walls around myself, Liz. Breaking them down doesn't happen overnight. That night taught us both something important about compromise and communication. Alexander started setting boundaries at work, something he'd never done before. I learned to voice my needs instead of expecting him to read my mind. 6 months after James and Vanessa's wedding, Alexander took me to his family's lake house for the weekend. I'd met his parents by then, his father, a retired judge with Alexander's same piercing eyes, and his mother, a warm-hearted pediatrician who had immediately taken me under her wing. His younger sister, Sophia, had become one of my closest friends, often teasing that I was the best thing that ever happened to her emotionally stunted brother. That weekend at the lake was perfect, swimming in the clear water, reading on the dock, making love in the moonlight. On our last evening, Alexander suggested a sunset boat ride. My grandfather proposed to my grandmother on this lake, he mentioned casually as he helped me into the small wooden boat. Is that so? I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite my racing heart. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I had a whole speech prepared, he said, suddenly looking nervous, an expression I'd rarely seen on his confident face. About how you crashed into my life and changed everything. About how you make me laugh and challenge me and see the world differently. But now that we're here, all I can think to say is that I love you, Eliza Bennett. Not the woman I pretended to date, but the real you, stubborn, creative, kind, and brave. Will you marry me? Tears blurred my vision as he opened the box to reveal a vintage emerald ring. Yes, I whispered. 1,000 times yes. We were married 8 months later at the lake house, surrounded by family and friends. Rachel was my maid of honor, and Alexander's best friend from college was his best man. To everyone's surprise, James and Vanessa sent a gift with a note that simply read, "Sometimes things work out exactly as they should. Congratulations." 1 year after that fateful wedding where our story began, I found myself back at Rosewood Estate, this time as a bride. Alexander had surprised me by booking it for our first anniversary celebration, a symbolic gesture to mark how far we'd come. As I walked through the same rose garden where I'd once watched my ex marry someone else, Alexander took my hand. "Any regrets?" he asked. I thought about the strange, winding path that had led us here. How a desperate plan to save face had given me something I never expected, a second chance at love with a man who saw me, really saw me, and chose me every day. "Just one," I said, watching his expression grow concerned. "I wish I'd spilled my coffee on you sooner." Relief and love washed over his face as he pulled me close. "Next lifetime, promise to find me earlier?" "Promise," I whispered against his lips. That evening, as Alexander and I danced under the stars where we'd once pretended to be in love, I thought about James and Vanessa, and sent them a silent thank you. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we're meant to be. That day, as Alexander held me close and whispered, "I love you," against my hair, I knew that some stories don't end with heartbreak. Some end with finding the love you weren't even looking for. And sometimes, the most beautiful love stories begin with the words, "Excuse me, can you be my date for my ex's wedding?" If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more emotional love stories that remind us all that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings. Let us know in the comments which country you're watching from. We love hearing from our global audience.